A digital twin has become the new buzzword in the supply chain industry, claiming to be a virtual representation of how a supply chain works. In this episode, we want to challenge the claims that a digital twin is this digital counterpart capable of conducting various accurate simulations of a supply chain of different what-if scenarios to see the impact of the different supply chain decisions. Now, Johannes, what is a digital twin really look like for the user?
From afar, my perception on digital twins, it's one of those buzzwords where it's really form over substance. It is, you see, I would say technological communities, scientific communities, they need buzzwords as rally point, if you want, so that people who are looking at a problem the same way can essentially come together and have something like a scientific conference or just a business trade show, or again, it crystallizes the way the community operates so that people who are basically facing the same sort of problem, that see the same sort of solution can come together and work. And if, for example, I were to take a buzzword, but there is substance behind it, that would be deep learning. Deep learning is an entire set of undertaking, of scientific undertaking, of technological undertaking. So it's not like one thing. It's plenty of things. Nevertheless, this buzzword is used as a rally point so that people can converge toward it and work together at the scale of the community. So that in this way, it does its job. The problem that I see with digital twin is that I do see the buzzword. I do see, there's some sort of, on the surface, there's some sort of mechanics at play, meaning that there are vendors who are putting, digital twin front and center, that are creating brochures, that are touting many, good attributes, that are qualifying, digital twins with many positive attributes, that it lets you do tons of things, that it gives you tons of, I would say, benefits for your supply chain. However, when we start digging a little bit on what is underneath, my perception so far is that it's very, very shallow. There is no grand computer science revolution. There is no mathematical revolution. There is no machine learning revolution. There is no. It's very hard to even pinpoint any kind of truly innovative aspect of what could be put behind those digital twins.
So you'd say there's no hardcore innovations at the core of a digital twin?
I haven't seen one. I would say it's maybe there is a little bit more value. It might actually be tangentially a little bit better than, let's say, demand sensing that we reviewed, a few months ago, which is just pure vaporware. However, even if there are ways in which I can see digital twins making interest, I would say, make no mistake, it's going to be very, very incremental in terms of type of innovation.
But vendors who do sell digital twins are phrasing it as a supply chain simulator. Would you say that it's supposed to be a simulator?
First, most vendors who are, I would say, in the process of selling digital twins remains extremely vague about what it actually is. They would say it is like your virtual supply chain, a representation of your supply chain.
So what is a virtual supply chain?
That's virtual means essentially that it's not your real supply chain. That's essentially, this is essentially something that is a representation of your supply chain. So far it remains incredibly vague. A battle plan on paper of your supply chain could be, a virtual representation of your supply chain. Typically it's I would say, associated with a computer aided representation of your supply chain. So virtual has this kind of coolish, positive connotation attached to it. It is also a bit surfing on the sort of, virtual worlds, virtual realities sort of things, a bit like Facebook rebranding itself as Meta. This is, again, it is the same sort of vibes that I can see. Then the interesting thing is that indeed, when you start to try to figure out what is it technically, at best I can assess, because again, most of our competitors provide incredibly little amount of technical details about what it is, it looks like glorified simulators about supply chains. You know, again, prove me wrong, but I haven't seen elements that let me think that it's that essentially supply chain twins are anything but fancy simulators.
So you say it's kind of similar vibes as Facebook changing its name to Meta. What do you mean it's the similar vibes to that?
I was just referring to the sort of, I would say, marketing style, sort of style of communication that goes with pushing the product. Nothing
So
else.
it's a way to package.
Yes,
a
you
software.
would see that at every, I would say, every decade, when people want to project something that is futuristic, they are not pushing the same sort of metaphor. They are not pushing the same sort of themes. If we go back into, for example, the 50s, 70 years ago, everything would be about humanoid robots. You would see plenty of futuristic advertisement. When people wanted to think about what is the future look like, you would have people that were literally disguised as robots with something that is very, I would say, almost like incredibly dated today, where you have like people that are covered in metal plates, and you say we have a robot. It's obviously one person in the middle of a disguise, and you see there is plenty of metaphors. For example, the AI, in terms of sort of messaging, you would see plenty of people that try to communicate with the cognitive technologies, as if they were copying the brain. So there is part of the sort of imagery that comes with artificial intelligence is to have the brain, the cognitive aspect, as if you had like a mind in the machine. This is the sort of themes and imagery that comes with that. Digital twins are playing on another thing. They are playing on the idea of virtual realities, on the metaverse, on the sort of, a bit like the Matrix sort of style of, vision for the future. Again, I'm not saying this is scientific. It's just like a marketing gimmick. It's the way you approach that. And by the way, every single sort of, I would say, scientific undertaking is attached, to a certain way to sell itself. Even if it's pure science, you always have to kind of market it to the community at large. So it's not a bad thing in itself. It's okay to have like some sort of themes and imagery that comes with it, but it's I believe important in the realm of enterprise software to identify that. Why is it important? Well, because people are first and foremost trying to sell stuff to you. So you see, it's not like we are not doing that for the beauty of the human mind. It is first and foremost a for-profit undertaking to improve supply chains.
So hold on, let's unpack this a little bit. What are the supposed benefits then of a digital twin?
According to I would say the communication of many other vendors that could be qualified as competitors of Lokad. So Lokad do not sell digital twins. I believe we are doing tons of things that are very much under the umbrella of the expected benefits of digital twins.
So,
however, it's a choice. We don't market ourselves as digital twins. So take this with a grain of salt. I'm basically trying to describe, in a way that is not too unfair, what our competitors are essentially trying to sell under this umbrella.
a comment on Lokad and digital twins, because what we do here at Lokad, when we look at our probabilistic forecasting, we look at all the sort of expected outcomes of all the different decisions that you can possibly take to compare them against each other. So essentially, when we some of the claims of a digital twin is to be able to project all the different decisions in a what if scenario and then see the impact of that. So isn't that kind of a similar way, except a digital twin is kind of the dashboard is more gamified in a way?
So I think what is put forward with digital twins is the supposed superior capabilities in being able to have, I would say, a much higher degree of expressiveness, so that you can have you can see tons of possible futures, tons of variations in the future. And I would say it's all fine and well in terms of intent. However, where I'm very puzzled is that as soon as you start to do that, well, essentially, if you have any kind of projection for any kind of virtual supply chain, then there will be the question of accuracy, because what you're doing is a forecast. And you see, I can't help myself to think about all those vendors who have immense struggle when it comes to the accuracy of their forecasting technologies. And that suddenly, through digital twins, make the problem disappear. You see, at least in the marketing brochure. So you see, one of the things that I haven't seen at all in those discussions about digital twins is that everybody is, I would say,
Hyped about the idea.
hyping the idea that you can do so much in terms of looking at all the possible futures. I would say, yes, very interesting. So essentially, you're doing a forecast. And then people would say, no, it's not just a forecast. It is much more versatile than that. I would say, fine. If it's a very, very versatile forecast that lets you look at tons of possible futures, what you are technically doing is known in the scientific community, statistical community, as a probabilistic forecast. So you're looking at tons of probable futures. And even like a policy-driven, if you want to be able to inject into that higher order constructs, such as policies, your pricing policy, your replenishment policies, and whatnot. But then there is this question of the accuracy, and that's something that puzzles me, is that it looks like all those vendors who are pushing their digital twin, that would be my first class of concern, is that it seems as if they don't even realize, and they might actually not even realize, that there is like a massive accuracy problem.
So, in your opinion, a digital twin is essentially a forecast, but it's packaged as a digital twin, and when it is packaged as that, the sort of association or the concern, about accuracy kind of goes away, because accuracy is linked to forecasts. When the forecast isn't used as the word,
the problem is
disappears.
that I would say here we have another problem, is that the word forecast in supply chain circles is actually applied to an incredibly narrow type of forecast, which are essentially point time series forecasts. So for those who are interested, they can see my lecture that I've done about probabilistic forecasting a little while ago. But essentially, there is an entire bestiary of forecasts that exist. So are digital twins, can we say that digital twins are time series forecasts? Not at all. So let me rephrase that very clearly. Digital twins are not forecast if you define forecast from the perspective of point time series forecast. They are more than that. Agreed. Now, as soon as essentially you're making, I would say, a quantitative statement about the future, that's essentially the broader definition of a forecast. A forecast is a statement that is non-ambiguous and quantitative about the future. So that can take, that I would say incredibly versatile type of forms. Then from this much broader definition, then yes, I would say that digital twins, at least the way they are presented by our competitors, very much fall into this category. And thus my first class of concern is that as soon as you have a forecast of any kind, doesn't matter, if it's a point forecast, a probabilistic forecast, or any other more elaborate kind of forecast,
there's a question of
there is a question of accuracy. If you don't even ask this question, and furthermore, if you don't even develop the tooling that is needed to assess your accuracy, then you don't even know at all if what you're doing is actually, any good. What you might be doing is just toying with large quantities of numbers, which, by the way, considering modern computers, it is incredibly easy to just take a lot of numbers, shake them, put a lot of mathematical formulas in the middle so that it looks like a super scientific undertaking, but what you're doing is not science, is scientism. It's not because you have like a lot of processing power, check, lot of numbers, check, lot of numerical recipes, check, lot of mathematical formula, check. That what you get by combining all of that is something that is scientific or even reasonable. What you can get is just some sort of delusion about your virtual reality that has no real high quality relationship with your actual supply chain. Again, if you don't even measure your accuracy, no matter the type of forecast, you don't have the slightest clue about if what you're doing is actually even sensical.
So how do you improve on an existing digital twin?
But I mean, that's first, you see, existing digital twin. So first, you see, we have a system where if I look at what our competitors are doing, there doesn't even seem that they have even metrics. So first, if you don't have a measurement, I'm not exactly sure of what they are actually optimizing. But then it's not the only concern. That was just the first. So you see, again, I'm just saying that we have, if we even want to be able to pretend that what we're doing is not just a pure empty buzzword, we need to narrow the core concern. So first, we have a core concern that seems to be completely unaddressed by the supply chain vendors who are selling digital twins, which are the problem of accuracy. But it's not the only concern. We have another class of that is an exceedingly major concern, which is the adequacy at a semantic level between whatever you're doing in terms of virtual representation of digital, counterpart with the reality. Because you see, those digital twins, they are not like the Matrix, the old movie where you can recreate an alternate universe that is almost impossible to differentiate with the real world. Doing that is completely remains a feat of complete science fiction. We are, decades, if not centuries away to be able to do anything that looks like the Matrix. So whenever we want to simulate or have like a digital counterpart of a supply chain, we have essentially something that is an exceedingly simplified view of the supply chain. So make no mistake, even Lokad, when we are doing the most advanced modelization that we can for supply chain, we need to have the humility to realize that even what we consider to be a state-of-the-art in terms of sophistication and granularity of representation, I would say digital counterpart of a supply chain, is still an incredibly simplified vision of the supply chain. I mean, it is incredible. And more than that, the data that we need to feed, this virtual representation, this digital representation, it doesn't fall from the sky. The data that we are going to use comes from enterprise systems, business systems.
ERP systems.
ERP systems, warehouse management systems, CRMs, EDI, etc., etc. There are like dozens. And the point is that those systems have all been engineered to operate the supply chain, not to collect, I would say, scientifically accurate data about the supply chain.
So how does a digital twin blend with a classic ERP system?
I mean, first, we still haven't even started to address what is actually a digital supply chain, a digital twin, for supply chain. You see, people say, and that's, by the way, this is exactly a sort of question that vendors want to avoid. They want essentially the client to directly jump to, okay, how do we improve? What sort of benefits do we get, etc. But I restate, we need to first list all the concerns to even know if what we're looking at is something that is even real or sensical. And so there will be a third class of questions, which are what sort of expressiveness can we? So we say we had the problem of making a statement about the future, based on data that do not have a true alignment with the reality of your supply chain. There is no such thing. What you have is the historical data as seen through the ERP. This should not be confused with the realities. This is just a very, very distorted view. Fine, we have to be able to work with that, but make no mistake, there is like huge approximations that are going on, and those approximations can be very harmful with regard to the objective of bettering the supply chain that we might have using this digital twin. And then we have probably a third class of concern, which is how do you even operate over such digital representation of your supply chain? It's not clear that just because you have a digital counterpart that automatically stuff that are good for your supply chain will come out of it. Especially when people tell you you will get KPIs or key insights. I would say, fine, you have key insights, but essentially, until proven otherwise, those key insights, it means that the company will have to pay employees just to have a look at them. So you see, when you say that a piece of software delivers you KPIs and insights, essentially, it is still on the cost side of the equation for the company because, well, no matter how interesting those things might be, those numbers might be, essentially the company has to pay for people to look at them. And so far, it still do not produce, return investment. And by the way, that's a thing that I discussed in one of the previous episodes with the bureaucratic core of supply chain. In supply chain, it is always very much tempting to do all sorts of stuff that are bureaucratic in nature. That's the problem of having highly specialized people dealing with fairly technical tasks.
So you're very critical of digital twins, but
I'm not critical of digital twins. Again, let's be precise. I say that whenever you present a concept, we have to be very specific of all the sort of changes that needs to be addressed by the thing.
that's critical.
So, and my criticism is very precisely of the communications that are associated with digital twins as presented by my competitors.
Sure.
So you see, so the criticism so far is not about the digital twins themselves. We can get to that in a minute if you want. But it's about what is surfacing in terms of elements of communication. And so far, I would say these sort of elements that emerge, for me, are striking as if, they were missing the elephants in the room. And not like one elephant, but at least three major elephants are kind of, dismissed or disregarded or non-existent, if you want. And I would say that make me wonder whether they are paying any attention to the reality of the problem being solved.
Fair enough. But now let's get back to the digital twin itself.
Yes.
So one of the claims that I've seen vendors essentially saying that our digital twin is able to essentially have this intuitive dashboard that can instantly let you see, the, say, impact of different what-if scenarios. What is your kind of take on that? What would be your first criticism, if you wish, on that? But also, what are the benefits that we can get from a digital twin, in your opinion?
So first, I would say first the question is, what is an actual digital twin as implemented by the vendors who are vending digital twins? I'm sorry, I'm going to bypass your question, but first we need to ask the question, what is it technically? And here, you see, there is a value judgment, and I would say those are glorified simulators, Monte Carlo simulators, more precisely. Again, I said, despite the fact that the amount of technical information that is very, very thin, as pushed by many of our competitors, they still have a few screenshots floating around and a few tidbits of technical nuggets. So that's what I'm using to make this statement. So essentially, when people say that they have a digital twins, what they have is essentially a piece of enterprise software that gives you some kind of, I would say, modeling capabilities, and the way, because you see there are many ways to create those modeling capabilities. So essentially, they have something that is very much oriented toward a Monte Carlo mindset. So it's something that is going to essentially generate with a certain degree of noise, stuff that is supposed to represent the future state, essentially, of your supply chain. And they are typically going to have some sort of things that are more inspired, I would say, from the agent sort of modelization. So they basically try to represent the supply chain network as a whole as a collection of agents that have pre-configured behaviors, potentially learned behavior, so based on historical data to a limited degree. And then they just run the simulator and collect essentially metrics that are as if you were putting probes at specific locations or on specific patterns in your supply chain. So essentially, at a technical level, a digital twin is a kind of simulator, is, I would say, a Monte Carlo simulator that is geared toward supply chain use cases. Now, when it comes to claims on, for example, that you can have dashboards, yes, I mean, with any simulators, you can put probes all over the place to just measure the outcomes from your simulators. And then it is very, very easy to collect, thousands of numbers. And thus, if you have thousands of numbers, it is very easy to compile them into visually pleasing way, like a dashboard. Again, the main problem is how much trust and how much should you have in those numbers, and that brings me back to the question of accuracy. So you see, that's the problem. Having dashboard, yes. Having fancy dashboards, most certainly. I trust my competitors to be able to do that. But let's be realistic. It is possible to have very pleasing reports with Excel, and it has been possible for 3 decades. So it's very incremental at best for this sort of category of benefits.
So what would your idea of benefits then be?
Then let's challenge another quality. You see, that's one that you mentioned, intuitive. And that's interesting because that's absolutely not my experience with anything that is like a simulator. Simulators are very much black boxes. It is very complex, pretty much by design, and it is absolutely not the sort of I would say, numerical recipes, that lend themselves to easy explanation. By the way, Lokad is using quite extensively Monte Carlo processes, simulators, generators, if you want, and it is something that has a very strong, I would say, affinity to probabilistic forecast. However, even if Lokad is using that, I'm the first to recognize that those methods are not especially intuitive, especially when it comes to the results. And it is pretty much by design. What you want to capture with a simulator is typically all the sort of non-linearities that you cannot capture through other methods. But as soon as you deal with phenomena, in your supply chain that are highly nonlinear, suddenly it becomes very difficult and very black box-ish to get a grasp about what is going on. It means that suddenly you have like you just adjust ever so slightly a parameter, and you have like an enormous response at the other side of the network. And it was kind of unexpected. And if the simulator is accurate, then it is good. It means that it gives you, a tool to basically kind of get control about, yes, and get a better grasp about the unintended consequences of seemingly small action in your supply chain. However, first, it all depends on the accuracy of the simulator. And then it's not going to be something that is intuitive in any way. It's going to be very, very black box-ish at best. And again, it is very much when you're simulating the whole supply chain, it is a very, very complex, not necessarily complicated, but a very complex sort of numerical modelization that is going on. So it doesn't really fall into the category of things that I would qualify as intuitive in terms of proposition of systems for end users.
So a simulator, essentially a forecast behind the simulator curtain where the accuracy isn't questioned. And the idea is that we essentially can see this sort of supply chain all in one screen and, toggle with different parameters to see if I say do this decisions or order this match or dispatch this amount into one warehouse A to B. You can, tweak the parameters and instantly kind of see on the screen what the output of that is. So, on paper, that sounds great. It sounds like a kind of this magic ball that you can see in the future. Of course, when you don't question the accuracy, that's essentially what it is.
Yeah, and there is also plenty of other questions. Yes, when you have a simulator, you have agents, which are essentially the building blocks, of your simulation. So essentially, when you say we run a simulation across the supply chain, it means that we are going to simulate every single SKU to associate, for example, a replenishment behavior, a consumption behavior, these sort of things. So we have plenty of tiny agents, if you want, that have their own behaviors. And when we say we let the simulator play out, we just let all those agents, operate and give us a potential future state of the supply chain, and we can do that many times. Now, indeed, by design, this sort of approach, agent-based simulation, lends itself to a high degree of configurability. You can touch every single agent and modify that. This is indeed you can do that, and indeed you can have your wall of metric that you will obtain by just running the simulator. Now, that creates the question about, is it a realistic exercise? You see, we have potentially, if we're talking of a large-scale supply chain, thousands of SKUs. Does it actually make sense to pay people to manually tweak the parameter that control the agent, the modelization of every single SKU one by one? Yes, you can do that, but is there a point? Is there value? And that's also another big part of concern, is that absolutely you can do that, but this is part of the realm of the, I would say, given capabilities that are very much what you get out of the design. But then there is a question of, should you do that? And by doing that, you will get numbers, but how do you decide that a tweak is even better than the other?
If we can just tweak something, say, what happens if I order this much of this product? So essentially you tweak something and then you see the output of that as in just one scenario.
Yes.
That sounds like time series to me.
So first, what you're going to get typically if you run a Monte Carlo simulator is not one scenario. It's like the aggregation of the average outcome over many, many scenarios.
Well, hold on, but they claim that if that it's an intuitive way to see the outcome of different what-if scenarios. So if I ordered this much, I should get an instant picture of what the future of that would be, not different pictures, just one.
Yes, yes, because essentially what you do with typically simulators, you average out results.
It is a time series forecast.
It is a point output. You see, that's the difference, is that it's a technical thing, is that the sort of time series assume that essentially you have a vector of information that is granular over time.
But it has a point output.
Essentially, you will get an average estimate. And the problem is not, what you will get, you see, is a point estimate of the consequence of your adjustment. And in this regard, it's fine. It is fine, to do that. You cannot maintain this all future possible until the very end. At some point, you have to basically say, I have a decision. I want to assess the economic outcome of this decision. So this part is fine. What may not be fine is that if essentially users have to, just go through potentially millions of parameters by hand, then you have something that is heavily, heavily impractical, distracting, and time-consuming. And the benefits that you may get in identifying better decisions may not, may not suffice to essentially cover the cost of paying all the people that need to tweak the simulator. That's one class of problem. And then you have another class of problem, is that what you will get out of a simulator is a wall of metrics. You see, literally thousands of numbers. So how do you compare a decision A with a wall of metrics, so you have thousands of metrics, and with a decision B with another thousand of metrics, knowing that some are better, some are lesser, some are dramatically worse, some are dramatically better.
So it kind of sounds like an RFP process in a way. You have so many different variables. How do you compare when all the variables are different rather than just one?
Yes, that creates that, by the way, that creates a real question of comparison. And again, why do you have wall of metrics? Well, because when you have a simulator, you can measure every single thing. So for example, you can say that you can measure all the service level for every single SKU. So your output of your simulator, when you average over thousands and thousands of executions, is literally a service level for every SKU, a quality of service for every customer,
Inventory costs and
inventory costs for
everything.
every single of your supplier, and every single, because the benefit, and that's a true benefit of the approach, of the system level approach of that is put forward by digital twins, and I recognize that it is something that is very much of interest. So the idea is you simulate not a single SKU, but the entire supply chain, end to end, as far as you can reach, as far as you can reach with the data that you have for your suppliers, because you don't have perfect information about your supplier, and as far as you can reach, so upstream, and then as far as you
Fair
can
enough.
reach downstream
End to end.
on the side, where end to end for the portion of supply chain that you control.
Fair.
Because
But still, the bottom line is that seems like the question still remains, which decision is the best?
yes, and I would say that's also another, fourth elephant in the room, which is
What's
what
the
I
real
see
output
is
of this?
exactly what do you do once you have those capabilities. And for me, this is, as far I am looking at the digital twin, it looks like to me that is a question that do not have answers. And there is, I would say, a psychological trick that is used by enterprise supply chain vendor and enterprise vendor in general, is that as soon as people see a piece of software where they can interact and do things, they gain familiarity, and at some point they like the software. You see, even if interacting with the software, and when you say gamified, that was spot on. It has a game element. But the problem is that game element means that you can have people like the product, like the software, but it doesn't prove that
Takes the focus away from the output, basically.
that it do anything good for your company.
So
Again, it's not because, you see, if I was saying that to say that as part of company policy, people should play cards 2 hours a day, I'm pretty sure there were a lot of people that would enjoy this activity, and they would say, we love this, and but it doesn't mean that it creates added value for the company.
So to conclude here, if we can just circle back to what a digital twin actually is, could you, say your definition of what is actually a digital
my
twin?
perception is that essentially a series of vendors are repackaging, I would say, decade-old concepts for simulators. What has changed essentially is that the processing power is now sufficiently cheap that you can have like a low resolution Monte Carlo process that spans over an entire supply chain without too much difficulty, which means essentially you take a big machine with a lot of CPUs. Monte Carlo is very easy to parallelize. It is an embarrassingly parallel, that's the technical term, problem. And thus a lot of vendors find themselves with the capacity to create a product that is cheap to implement, that does a simulation of a supply chain wide system. That's what they can do. And then because they can do it, they can sell it. And because there is no radical innovation going on, they have found digital twin as a rally point to basically make this product more appealing. Because if I tell you we are going to do a Monte Carlo approach based on stuff that were discovered in the 50s, 70 years ago, suddenly people would say, yeah, really? Is it? So essentially, they do that. And then to basically, I would say, make the thing even more attractive, they add more qualifiers, such as real-time and synchronization. I would say good and well. However, with a simulator, by design, you're never going to get anything real-time. Except if your simulator is incredibly, I would say, shallow in terms of sophistication. So that's really something that is questionable. And nevertheless, I see the reason why there is traction for this product is that there is one key element of truth, which is a system-wide, I would say, approach for the supply chain. That really deserves a very, very serious look. So it is a very worthy undertaking to say, we don't want to do to basically bridge the silos and have a system-wide approach.
A unified
that has, I would say, this is I would say a very appealing concept to me. I can see a lot of value to that. Now, having simulators, Monte Carlo simulators, is one ingredient. But what I'm saying, and that would be my point, is that I don't criticize digital twins for what they are. A simulator is just well and sound. It is fine. It is an established way to do, I would say, probabilistic forecast in a very generic sense. What I'm saying is that I see enormous amount of elements that are just missing from the picture, and it looks as if people had been working on the capabilities that are cheap to implement, and they are trying to sell them, while, well, there is entire classes of capabilities that are entirely missing, but they are unfortunately much more difficult to implement and much more expensive, but they are the ones that truly make this capability, Monte Carlo simulation, really useful for supply chain. And so my point is that digital supply chain is good if it's a rallying cry to have a more holistic approach to supply chain from I would say, a computerized perspective. But if you think that Monte Carlo approaches are anything but one algorithmic ingredient, I think that would be a very misguided, I would say, idea that with just that you can actually improve your supply chain.
Okay, Jonas, thank you very much for sharing your insights on digital twins. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.